let's just do it this way. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce one of our special guests joining us via technology today. Her smiling face, all the way direct from Olympia, or thereabouts. Very familiar face to many in the room, Jessica Bavris, who, as you know, is the legislative advocate and liaison for the Washington State School Directors Association. Jessica is kind enough to join us this morning to share with us just a brief 10-minute update on legislation for two reasons. One is that she has another commitment, probably on the Hill here in just a little bit. But I asked her if she could come and share a little bit. When she and I first talked about this, you never quite know what the timing is going to look like. But as many of you are aware, we had a Senate budget that landed on the street yesterday. And as always happens when a first budget hits the street, there is a flurry of activity, much of which we're all interested in. So, Jessica, welcome. It's great to have you with us this morning. As you're looking out across the crowd, this is Superintendents, Building Principals, Central Office staff, ESD staff from North Central Washington. So welcome, Jessica Bavris. Jessica.
Great. Thanks, Rich. And thank you, everybody. Oh, wow, you're clapping. Thank you. It's so great to see so many familiar faces. It's my pleasure to join you today. So thanks again for inviting me, Rich. Before I jump into sort of the nuts and bolts of things, I wanted to just take a step back and take a breath and couch us in the context of where we are right now in the legislative session. So we are on day 74 out of 105 days, which means there are 31 days left in the regular session. Parties, the two houses, leadership in the two houses around the budget, especially the education leadership, have only in the last 2 weeks started sitting down together to try to start bringing their plans together. So while some would say we really need them to get out of town on the last day of the session because we don't want any special sessions, others might say it might be nice to allow them a few more days. The reality of how far apart our two parties are with regard to the budget is very wide. And so, as you know, as school leaders, coming up with a good, solid, sustainable, and maintainable plan, doing that in 31 days or less when people are staying up in committee meetings until 1 or 2 in the morning might not be the best implementation approach for coming up with something to serve all the students in the state. So while many of us here are really tired and would love for them to be done, I personally would rather them take the time that they need to come together with a proposal that can meet certainly the interest of the Supreme Court, but more importantly, continue us in a secure way for education funding well beyond just the next couple of years. So what I would say, I would echo what Rich said. Basically right now, we have been sitting with, and you've been looking at many of the plans. We've had the what in front of us for some time. We had the governor's proposal, his ed funding proposal in January. We had the House and the Senate proposals. So we've been all sort of making meaning of those, and hopefully you've been analyzing the impacts that they've had, that they might have on your buildings. It may be difficult to do because we don't necessarily have the budgets that go along with those yet. So this week, it was the next step of that, which is the how. So the budget is the how part of this puzzle. And so it is easy to get super excited and anxious about everything as it's released. And what I would say is that it's really important to just take deep breaths and know this is a process. So the Senate's budget came out today, 2 days ago. The way it goes in Olympia when they release their budgets is they give people like us about 2 hours to read them and analyze them before we have to testify on them. So if you happen to have been watching the hearing, or you can go back and watch it on Tuesday, the 100 people who testified on the entire operating budget, I don't know how many there were for education alone, but we literally had roughly 2 hours to make some meaning and piece some things together. So that's the context. So next Monday, the House will be releasing their budget around noon. Their public hearing is at 3:30. So we get 3.5 hours. So that'll be really substantive time. So really it's looking at the how and how it's funded. So the other thing that we would say, and if you've read what Dan Steele recently put out, his summary is a really good summary of the nuts and bolts in his special edition that he sent out of TWIO yesterday. So you can go into that and see some of the adjustments that they make in their budget related to their ed funding plan. But essentially, the K-12 portion of the budget funds 5607, which is the Senate Education Funding Plan. There are a few, so last week the revenue forecast was up, and so they made some adjustments such as lowering the local effort or state property tax rate from $1.80 to $1.55 per thousand. So that was one adjustment they made with that windfall of dollars. They also made some adjustments in the budget. So the other thing that you would see that came out this week was it's called a trailer bill, a trailer being an amendment essentially to Senate Bill 5607. So Senate Bill 5875 is a trailer bill. And what that means is it makes those adjustments. They couldn't amend 5607 because it already was adopted by the Senate. So they had to, so these two together will make one full proposal. And so that makes a few adjustments like the one I just mentioned. The per pupil guarantee is changed from 10,000 per pupil to 9,200 starting in 2018. So what they did, because they passed the levy cliff, basically next year is status quo. So they keep the prototypical model, they keep all of your funding secured as was intended, all your levy rates, everything for next year. So all of the changes in the budgets take effect for the 2018-19 school year. There are a few other adjustments in 5875 and also the budget. But just in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into them deeply. What we will be doing is hopefully you have seen, or I know your school directors have seen, we have a big piece of paper that's the side-by-sides of all the different budget proposals. So what we'll be doing is modifying the Senate's proposal to incorporate the components of 5875, just so you can see on the highest level what it means. What I would say, I often think about this work, for those of you who know me, I'm really into partnerships and roles. And so I really see our role here in Olympia is trying to make some sense for you so that you can access the hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents. But it is a partnership with you, because what we need your help with is digging into the spreadsheets. I should have actually brought one. It's on like this big a paper, but looking at the school district impacts that all of these plans will have. OSPI, I know, they create pivot tables that you are able to use based on each of the budgets. There's pivot tables out for the governor's proposed budget, but not yet for the Senate and not yet, obviously, for the House. They are having a hard time with that because the budget proposals are so very different, especially on the Senate side, than finance and accounting has been. And so they are having to create new models for those pivot tables. So my worry is that their work won't be fast enough to help you, although there are spreadsheets, just static spreadsheets that you can utilize to go to. Many of you probably have looked at those, but to look at what would the impacts be to you with this budget, with this proposal. Next week there will be updated spreadsheets with the House budget. The big thing, as you know, so I'm assuming all of you read the newspaper or read some sort of information about Olympia. The big question is, what will the House be looking to for revenue? It's my understanding that there are I've seen what are called title-only bills, which are just titles with nothing under them, broad titles, where the House will be putting their revenue proposals. So we anticipate seeing they have to have those in order to also come out with a budget. So we anticipate seeing those as well. But it's really not going to be that mysterious. I think we're, if you were to look at the governor's budget, you've got carbon tax, you've got B&O closures, you've got those sorts of things. And that's really what the House's internet sales tax, those sorts of things. In conversations on the Senate side, they believe what we're hearing is there might be one additional smaller revenue source that they might need to locate. Could be the internet sales tax to meet the obligations as they see them in their budget. So again, what I would say is this is a starting point of negotiations. I was in a meeting yesterday where we started to go into detail, and the senator I was talking to said, you know what, we have to put everything under the sun in this, and we know we're going to be backing off. So there are things that I know have been causing some heartburn, like their choice to use the census data for poverty compared to the free and reduced lunch rate poverty in the Senate plan. I can't tell you 100% for sure, but pretty close to 100%, there is knowledge that that is just not a good idea. So the chances of that being the measure for poverty in the final end game are pretty low. So with that, the other thing that I would say, and between WASA, so Dan Steele and myself put together a survey that we sent out to members of our respective legislative committees. And so I'm not sure if any of you or I know some of your school directors, or at least a couple, are on WASA's legislative committee, and I'm not sure about WASA's, but what I would say is that survey, if you're interested in looking at it, has been a welcomed piece of data to the legislators that are working on the budget. And what it is it's agnostic of plans. So we're not saying which plan do you like over this other plan. It's really gathering your input on the implications for your districts related to things like an elimination of the prototypical model. What does that mean for your district? The salary allocation model. What are the important big rocks that you need to see in that if we need one? Levy reform. I should say collective bargaining. So information from you regarding your input on collective bargaining, levy reform, and sort of with an increased base, what does that mean around that sweet spot for levy rates? And then state healthcare benefits and that sort of thing. So we have about 20 districts that have completed it. It's a great cross section of the state. I think I know I think a couple of your districts have completed it, but if you're interested in adding your voice to that data collection, please, Rich knows how to get a hold of me. Please let me know and I'll send you the link. That is something that we're meeting weekly with the House education leaders that are working on the budget, and we're also meeting, I meet on a regular basis with Senate leadership, and try to share these pieces of data. So we're really trying to be of assistance, knowing that this is a really hard situation that everyone is in. So we need to help them find middle ground and find the place that can be a good, productive place to land with all of this. So I can pause for a moment and see if you have questions or thoughts or things around the budget. And then I did want to touch on a couple of other policy issues that you should be aware of.
Any quick burning question for Jessica before she goes on to the other piece? We'll also email any questions as well, Jessica. So I've got one quick question. Jeff?
Yeah, it's a question about reconciling the middle of the levy cycle. How do you collect after 2019? What's the top there? Is that the relationship to no fault?
Yeah, so the question, Jessica, is around, for example, they extended the levy cliff for a year. I think that there's a common presumption out there that by doing that runs through January of 19, which would be in the middle of a levy collection. If there's been, are they aware that that's an issue?
You know what? That hasn't been something that I've been in conversations about, but one thing so we have a meeting every Tuesday with members of the House leadership team, and several districts that are part of the group that I work with have their superintendent and their board chairs have authored feedback like that. And so specifically to number one, districts that have to run levies in 2018 and your timeline around that, and then other questions that you have like the one you raised would be great to have in writing. And if you do send it to your legislators, or if you just want to send it to me and Dan, we're able to then share it in those meetings. So it takes a lot of people to carry this water. So thank you for they always want to hear what school districts are saying. So do send that to us.
Yeah, thank you for that, because if you're in the middle of a 3 or 4 year levy, that becomes
Right.
a real hit, being in the middle of a collection year. So with that, Jessica, I don't see any other hands. Any other items that you wanted to share quickly?
I do. Actually, so there are a couple of things. So right now, the next cutoff, the policy cutoff, the second policy cutoff of this session is next Wednesday. And what that means is that any policy bills that came over from the opposite chamber have to be out of the policy or the education committees mostly by 5 o'clock next Wednesday. If they're not, it doesn't mean that they're entirely dead, but it means they're suffering a little bit. So I wanted to let you know about a couple of things. One is regarding the graduation assessments, the high school assessments that are required for graduation. House Bill 1046, which is the D-Link bill for all three ELA, math, and science, would take effect for the class of 2017. That received a hearing on Monday, and there were a lot of students, teachers, counselors, principals there in support of that bill. I don't know that the chair of the education committee in the Senate is planning to move it out of his committee. He did introduce a bill that was science only, so delinking the science end of course assessment from graduation for the class of 2017, and that did move forward through the one of the committees yesterday. So that is moving, but for our association and certainly for districts across the state, the impact of all three assessments as graduation requirements is one that we need your help communicating about. What are the ramifications? How many kids are you anticipating not meeting standard and being at risk for not graduating because of that? They might have all their credits, but it could be an issue with the assessment. Certainly, there are the numbers that we're talking about. We're also looking at lost opportunities for kids to be accessing electives. Certainly, it's a demoralizing experience for many to continue to take classes to try to pass a test for graduating. So that's one that is really important. Another one that I know the ESD regions have been active in are bills related to educator recruitment, retention, certification, those sorts of things. There are two bills that I wanted to draw your attention to. One is House Bill 1341, and that is the bill that basically creates a group to look at the professional certification requirements for teachers. So it's called the Professional Certification Collaborative, and their task is to look at all the requirements right now and the duplication with TPEP and all of that, and put some recommendations together that would change the professional certification requirements. The bill also takes a step back from requiring pro cert. It requires three options that are options for certification: clock hours, national board, and the pro teach process. And that would basically be in place until that collaborative group makes some recommendations. This is probably the closest that the House could get to without eliminating the pro cert, pro teach process. That's as close as they could get. There is some concern that the Senate Ed Committee, the chair may not be moving that bill out of his committee. he is worried about having it be a step backwards. And so those of you who know me, I've been doing this topic for a while. So I was trying to explain to him why it's important as a vehicle and why, in terms of the teacher shortage, all of that, but also that we need an objective group to make some recommendations here in the year 2017 about professional certification. And so that is one that we need your help. If you can reach out to your legislators or the chair, members that you know on the Senate Ed Committee, they have just a few more days to hear bills. The other one, a couple of your districts, I know it's not a huge issue in your region regarding building schools or getting utilities out to schools that are built outside of urban growth boundaries. But we have, I don't know if Moses Lake is there, but I know Moses Lake and a couple others in your area have issues regarding that. That bill is being heard today in the Senate Ed Committee, which is where I'm headed. We have some updated information on that, but again, that's an important one that we'd love to have a fix this session so it doesn't have to keep coming up. And then the final bill that's also being heard today that I wanted to draw your attention to, that's gotten raised some, I don't know, gotten some people excited. How's that? Is the bill that basically looks at the accountability and governance roles between the State Board of Education and OSPI. And that is House Bill 1886. That bill is basically a task force to look at those roles between the State Board and OSPI and reduce the duplications between roles and accountabilities. But there is a lot of interest and questions around why is it just OSPI and the State Board? Why aren't there other organizations like the PESB or others involved? So certainly if you have thoughts about that from the lens of what could help make things in your world easier, if a governance group were looking at those sorts of things, they need to hear from you, as do we, so we know where you stand with that. So those are the things that I've got on my list. I probably have another minute or so if you have questions, but you can also email them to me.
Happy to do that. Any burning questions for Jessica before maybe you want us to delay you from going up on the hill, we're not sure.
Yeah.
Good question, Kenny.
What was the number on that ProCert bill?
Oh, the number on the ProCert bill?
It's 1341.
1341. Okay, very good. Yeah, we took a vote here. We're relatively certain that a task force will fix that problem, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, my issue was that the task force is facilitated by PESB staff. So my feedback is it sure would be nice to have a third party facilitating.
Yeah, sounds great. Jessica Vavras, our Governmental Relations Director from Washington State School Directors. Always a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Rich.